Hi, I'm Melissa Dunphy, and I am a composer. I became a composer kind of late in the game for classical music. It wasn't until I was 24 that I suddenly had the idea to become a professional composer and devote my life to that. And in classical music, that's really old. 24 is not actually old or late, but classical music is so obsessed with youth that it is like unusual, which is a rant for a whole different video. I'm not going to do that one today. A few years into becoming a composer, I started to wonder why it was that it had taken me 24 years of my life, 20 years after I had started studying music, to decide to want to be a composer. Like, why didn't I have the idea earlier than that? Because I truly had not had the idea before age 24 when I kind of stumbled into it. One of the big reasons that I came up with was my gender. And that's a huge factor, but that's also a rant for another video. I'm not going to get into that today. What I do want to get into today is a more universal reason why I didn't think about becoming a composer until I was 24 years old. And it's because of our genre itself, classical music. Classical music is really weird. There are many reasons it's weird, but I think the weirdest thing about classical music is that it's maybe the only genre of music where the practitioners of that genre are not only not encouraged from writing original music, but they're actually actively discouraged from writing original music, from creating their own music. And the reason I think that this is so weird is because of this. Music is kind of like a language, right? It kind of functions like a language. And it's not a universal language, so throw that in the trash, first of all. It's actually, every genre of music is kind of its own language. And if you're steeped in that language, you understand the way that that language works. It has its own structures and conventions that function in the same way as what we think of as a regular language to convey meaning. It has literature, it has forms and syntax and grammar and vocabulary. It even has punctuation. With all of these things, it creates references to itself that become symbols of extra musical concepts. And if you understand the language, you understand how certain combinations create very specific meanings and convey very specific thoughts and ideas. For example, if you have listened to a lot of classical music and you hear a big plagal cadence played on an organ, you instantly understand that church is being referenced. You are now in church. If you hear a piano tremolo diminished chord and you've grown up with this kind of music and hearing this kind of music out in the world, you understand that the reference is a moment of tension, almost melodramatic tension, kind of like in a silent film. Now, most of you have some experience learning a second language at some point in your education, even if you didn't hang on to it and you're not bilingual. You know how languages are usually taught. But let's just imagine for a second that let's take one of these languages that often gets taught as a second language to English speakers. Let's take French. Imagine you're studying French, and the way that you are taught French is as follows. Your teacher gives you a paragraph of a book written over 200 years ago by a dead white Frenchman such as Voltaire or Baudelaire or Marcel Proust, right? Everyone who speaks French supposedly knows and understands that these dead white European guys are geniuses, so they are acknowledged as the only people really worth reading in French. You study the paragraph that your teacher has given you for months, and at the end of the semester, you get up on a stage in front of a big crowd of people, and you are expected to have memorized that paragraph and to give a recitation of it in French. Now, everyone in the audience has heard that paragraph a million times already, so they all know how it goes. So if you mess up a vowel, and let me tell you, the vowels in French are really unforgiving. If you say instead of or something like that, everyone in the audience is like, ouch, wrong vowel, yikes, am I right? Good performance though, I mean it wasn't bad except for that one vowel. And meanwhile, your teacher or the examiner will clock the vowel that you said wrong and deduct points from your French grade. But afterwards, when you're finished, everyone will politely politely clap and they'll say how great and talented you are at French. But if someone were to come up to you after the recital and say, wow, great job, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself in French, would you? You wouldn't actually be able to do it. If someone were to ask you in French, where do you come from? Or what is your family like? You would have no idea how to reply. If they asked you to tell me your hopes and fears for the future in French, you would be completely stuck. You could maybe repeat some words about madeleines, about how much you enjoy eating madeleines on a Sunday in Normandy, even though you have never actually been to France in your life. But you couldn't say anything about yourself in French because you've never done that before. You couldn't even tell someone how to get to the train station in French. You can't even say your name in French because you have never, not once, been given the opportunity to do this in any of your French lessons or even thought about how to do it. If this were the case with you learning French, and this is how you were turned out, can you actually say that you speak French? Can you say that you are fluent in French? I think you know where I'm going with this. The answer is no, you cannot speak French if you have been taught like this. So why is this the way that we teach musicians the language of Western classical music? How can we say that we are fluent in music if all we do is repeat the musical stylings of guys who have been dead for 200 years? And listen, by the way, this is not the individual fault of your music teachers. This has been going on for generations. This was done to them too. Your teachers were actively discouraged from composing. Their teachers were discouraged from composing, and on and on and on. Except, here's the kicker. It wasn't always like this. This tradition is not as old as you think it is. This is something that's happened in our genre only over maybe the last 150 years, around about the time that we started really, truly buying into the myth of the white male genius composer who's the only one who allowed to put the notes on the staves. Performers used to do a whole lot more improvisation and composition. But over the years, the opportunities to use your own compositional voice as a performer, even in the most tiny and basic of ways, has been stolen from you. A prime example is the cadenza. It used to be that performers would be expected to make up their own cadenzas when they played a concerto. It was a performer's chance to say something original, to be something other than just a conduit for someone else's notes. But over time, the cult of the white male genius composer decided that we should actually just insert a cadenza written by some other dead white male European genius composer. So now violinists playing the Beethoven concerto are expected to shut the hell up and tack on the Kreisler cadenza instead of making up their own. On an even smaller, more granular level, singers who sing Baroque da capo arias, right, the aria where you sing it straight as the notes are written on the page the first time, and then the second time you ornament it, singers nowadays who learn this repertoire are often told exactly how to ornament the repeats. It used to be that the ornamentation was entirely up to the singer. And now it's like we're obsessed with learning the correct way to ornament, to the point where I see students on singers forums asking if there is sheet music available where all of the ornaments for the da capos have been written out because they are terrified of making up their own ornaments and getting it wrong. Classical music is so wedded to the idea that performers don't compose, that our performers are terrified of doing anything that isn't on the page and endorsed by the establishment. What a sad and shocking situation we're in. I went through a breakup with classical music in my late teens and early 20s, and I hung out with a lot of non-classical musicians, especially rock musicians. The world of rock is very different to the world of classical music. Rock musicians routinely criticize their fellow musicians who don't write their own songs. They say that they're not real musicians, right? I've seen this leveled at other rock musicians, at cover bands, at pop singers, you name it. They're really, they have so much contempt for people who don't compose. When I entered the world of rock music, I initially pushed back on this attitude. So, wait a second, you mean you don't think Yo-Yo Ma is a real musician? we would have these big debates about it in band practice. It really wasn't until years later when I became a composer and went back to classical music, and especially when I started teaching students for the first time, that I started thinking about those arguments and thinking, oh my god, what if the rock musicians are right? What if classical music is weird for telling its performers to leave composing to the supposed experts? Something that I hear a lot from classical musicians when I suggest that they should all be composing is, oh, I tried composing once and it was terrible, so I stopped. I'm not talented at composing and I don't consider myself a composer, so I don't ever compose. Listen, this attitude makes my hair stand on end. Let's look at a language that we all have experience with here, right? English. When you wrote your first short story or poem or essay in elementary school, did you look at it later and say, oh wow, this sucks. I am no Hemingway. Wow, I'm really bad at writing. I guess I'll never write another word in the English language as long as I live. Right? Your friends text you and you don't reply to their text. Instead, the next time you see them in person, you say, oh, I'm so sorry. I couldn't text you back because I'm not a writer. I don't write words. Of course you don't do this, right? The point of composing is not necessarily to turn you into a full-time composer in the same league as Beethoven any more than the point of learning how to write a short story or a poem or an essay is to make you the next great American novelist. It's to make you a better communicator, to let you express your emotions and ideas, to make you better at understanding our shared language. Composing music makes you a better musician. It makes you a better performer. It makes you a better human being because you learn how to express yourself. Even if you never perform your compositions publicly, even if you never get anything that you write out there into the world, even if you specialize in historically informed practice, if you don't compose at some level, I don't think you will ever understand the works that you perform as well as you would if you did compose. And by composing, I don't mean that you have to be churning out operas and symphonies either. Composing your own cadenzas and ornaments is composing. Composing in another genre, other than classical music, is composing. Being a singer-songwriter is composing. Jamming and improvising with your friends is composing. Remixing electronic tracks is composing. Arranging is composing. Orchestrating is composing. At its root, composing is about having your own opinions and contributing them to the dialogue in our art form. And the removal of composing from our default musical practice as classical musicians, which starts right at the beginning of our pedagogy, has had a horrific effect on our genre. We have become calcified. We have become stuck repeating the opinions and thoughts and emotions of dead white European men, framing them as universal. And these opinions and thoughts and emotions are frozen in a time when societal attitudes were far more sexist and racist than they are today. And we are living in our genre and our industry with that result. If we want classical music to continue, to grow, to get better, it has to start by encouraging the expression of new opinions in our language by all the speakers of our language. And that means that composition needs to be an integral part of our practice, not something left up to dead geniuses or mysterious specialists who have a God-given talent or whatever the hell. Get mad about this, because this has been done to you. You need to reclaim your voice in music. You need to give students, your students, their voice. We should all be composing.